And back in 2006, there was this book called Xenology, which described different alien races from Warhammer 40,000 told from the perspective of an Inquisitor. And the section on orks described a Megas biologist who was desperately trying to fight the ork spores, and he stumbled on a herbicide that, when ejected into the spores, made them grow lopsided and tumorous. Which gave me the idea, what if I do make my ork monstrosity a bit tumorous and a bit lopsided? Now, browsing through the Gellerpox infected kill team, I did notice that there was a miniature that reminded me a whole lot of the original artwork. And when I compared them side by side, it appeared as if it was the exact pose and body shape, just with a few extra mutations. Then I removed the cleaver because I just had a different idea for a weapon, and also the additional mutation on the shoulder as I wanted to create some additional armor pieces to make this feel like an ork. And to protect all of his vital organs, he got started by making this very interesting piece of chest armor. They do have this innate knowledge on how to grab random pieces of scrap and turn them into armor and weapons. While it does look hilariously small on such a hulking creature, it does protect all the necessary organs, similar to modern-day ballistic plates. Then of course, as the shoulder pads are the most 40k piece of armor, I had several different plates in mind that I thought would be a pretty good match for this really large miniature. However, when attaching the second shoulder pad, I did notice that the area was just a little bit too rough, so I first had to clean it up and make it look like a proper shoulder, as the armor was still not big enough to cover the entire area. And then I used a bit of Tamiya cement to smooth out the area and just make it a little bit nicer. And I have no idea what that random hole is, but I think that's left over from the mouth. Now, for the second shoulder, this was the biggest one I could find. However, relative to the size of the miniature, it was pretty small. But I think it kind of works with the aesthetic that this perhaps was once a regular ork, but after the experimentation that bloated him up, it no longer fits. Kinda like me after the Christmas dinner. Now, the Warboss in Mega Armor does have a little grot at the top that is handling a machine gun, and I found just the perfect little guy for that. However, as he doesn't have a gun and there's no way to attach him, I did have an alternative idea, where instead of shooting very massive bullets, this thing will be shooting out massive bolts of Wa energy. It also works well with the theme of Frankenstein, where back in the day, people thought electricity was going to start bringing people back to life through galvanism. Now, right as I was getting ready to pin this part to the model, I thought instead I'll drill it a massive hole. But I'm not sure if my battery was low, there was just something wrong with it, but it was making really strange noises. So I went back with a hobby knife and slowly made slight adjustments to make sure the fit was perfect. But what I failed to account for is that I have no way to balance it, and this thing was constantly tipping over. But I did find kind of a hilarious solution, because I just attached the grot and glued him onto the shoulder pad, and he was a perfect counterweight for it. The only downside is I really wanted to keep them separate so that I would have an easier time painting it, but I'll just work around it. Next up, I needed to decide on what kind of weapon this Warboss was gonna wield. And while the axe would have made a much better match to the original, I really thought that the one-handed cleaver look of this one just worked a lot better. Now, for this element, I was definitely going to have to pin this to the model because the connection itself was far too small and flimsy, and there was really no good way for me to attach him. I just had to hope that I didn't accidentally drill through his hand. So I ended up not going as deep as I would have wanted to, but still just enough so that I knew the connection was going to be secure. I definitely slightly overdid it with the size of that paper clip, because when I was actually attaching it, it did take a lot of pressure to get it all the way down. But when it was on there, I was quite confident in my decision, and it also just looked really awesome and matched the little weapon of the grot. However, something kept telling me that we need more Daka, because you always need more Daka. So I found some pretty cool grenades that I attached on his back, so that this way the grot can essentially grab them and just chuck him around. Now, unfortunately for this fella, his helmet no longer fits him, but it is his favorite helmet, so he's gonna carry it around. And after all, as long as you have a helmet, nothing can really go through your head, so this ork is gonna be a lot safer with it. For the base of the miniature, I started with some cork to make it look like a massive rock he's standing on, but then I started to pick out some additional parts that I thought would look really cool, as if it's part of the old structure that recently exploded. And of course, why not include the Inquisitor as well? Now, as translating scale through a screen is always quite difficult, here's a Space Marine and one of the old boys next to him. Now, for the base color of the miniature, I decided to go with mahogany instead of the usual black because this way I'll have a much easier time building onto the green. However, as I was painting him, I did run into this very annoying issue where he would constantly begin to tip over because he was simply far too heavy, so I thought I would just paint the base right away and then I can just glue him and continue painting. For the base, I did go through several different iterations of the colors, trying to figure out what kind of planet was this. And as I still had that Space Marine on my desk, I thought it'd be kinda cool to recreate the exact same OSL here. And then I decided to change the color of the base once more because now it was far too bright and the OSL wasn't really popping as much, so I switched to this very dark color and found some very nice looking alien tufts. And the picture for the box and the tufts had this very interesting stone gray look that just really looked great with them, so I ended up copying that idea and trying to recreate it, but with a little bit extra detail as if there's just tiny little cracks on the stone. When I was finally satisfied, I ended up gluing the miniature onto the base and continuing with the paint job. However, I didn't realize my battery was in fact dead. But I added a mid-tone to the skin color, and then I also used this very cool color for the mouths called Ork Dermis, which is this very peachy color. Now, when I got to the highlight stage of my skin, I tried going for something a little bit different and creating these very interesting zigzag patterns. I wanted to create a bit more texture for the skin to make it look like it's being stretched, it has a lot of scar tissue, and it's just generally mutated and weird. While I was quite uncertain about this effect at first, the more I essentially worked with it, the more I just really loved how it looked. So I made an additional pass with a brighter color to create sort of like a secondary layer of the scars. Now initially for the armor, I was gonna paint all of it in this gunmetal color to make it look like it's just made from a bunch of different scraps, but the entire miniature just didn't really feel orcish enough. So I changed my tactic entirely and I tried to repaint him as a goth. To my surprise, this actually turned out pretty well, as I usually have a little bit more difficulties trying not to miss with the metallic paints, but in this case, painting with regular paints was just a lot simpler. For all of the cloth areas, I ended up painting them in a pure black color, but I didn't just want to leave them as that. I mixed in a little bit of white into it, creating this very nice cold looking gray, but when highlighting, I didn't just want to re-highlight the entire thing, I tried leaving as much of that pure black as possible so that I still had highlights on the folds, but the actual inner layer of the cloth was still this very dark color. For the lightning rod that will be shooting out Wa energy, I was gonna keep as much of the metallic as possible, but I just didn't really like how it looked. As much as I wanted to avoid the blue, it simply just made the entire miniature a lot better and introduced an additional color that just balanced out the entire palette much better. And so from the ruins of the Hive City, this Frankenstein mega boss rises with his tiny little eye grot, ready to take on the galaxy.